Somewhere around 2,300 years ago, a man named Alexander stood on the edge of India and cried, not because he'd lost, because he'd run out of world to conquer. He had Greece, he had Persia, he had Egypt. He had more land than any human being in history had ever controlled. And it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Here's the question nobody really asks. Why? Why does a man who already has everything keep going? Why did Genghis Khan, Cyrus the Great, Napoleon, and 100 kings you've never heard of all do the exact same thing? Chase land they didn't need, wealth they couldn't spend, power that would eventually get them killed by the very people closest to them. The easy answer is greed. But greed doesn't explain it. Greed is simple. Greed stops when the stomach is full. This didn't stop. Cyrus the Great built the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen and immediately began planning the next campaign. Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of France, then spent the rest of his life trying to make that not be enough. This is something older, something buried much deeper in the male brain than ambition. And once you understand what it actually is, you'll never look at powerful men the same way again. Let's go back. Not to Rome, not to Persia. Back to a time before empires existed at all. Back when the biggest thing a man could build was a reputation. For most of human history, there was no throne to sit on. Our ancestors lived in small hunter-gatherer bands, maybe 30, 40 people. No kings, no armies, no gold. And yet even here, in this stripped-down version of society, something was already happening. Some men had more food, more mates, more influence over group decisions. Not because they were bigger or stronger necessarily, because they were better at climbing an invisible ladder every single person in that group could feel, but nobody had to explain. Status. Status wasn't a luxury back then. It was survival currency. A high-status man got first access to food during a bad season. He got chosen more often as a mate. His opinion mattered more when the group decided where to move or who to trust. And critically, his children were more likely to survive. This is the part people miss. Status wasn't about ego, it was about genes. A man who climbed the hierarchy didn't just win respect, he won reproductive success. And evolution does not reward the modest. It rewards whatever gets copied into the next generation. So a drive appeared, quietly, slowly, across hundreds of thousands of years. To be seen as more capable, more dominant, more valuable than the men standing next to you. And here's the uncomfortable part. That drive never had an off switch built in, because for most of human history, there was no such thing as enough. The environment was too unstable. A man with plenty today could be starving in a month. So the brain that survived best wasn't the brain that felt satisfied. It was the brain that kept pushing, just in case. There's a common misconception worth clearing up here. People assume ancient hierarchies were built purely on physical dominance. The biggest, strongest man simply beating everyone else into submission. Anthropologists studying surviving hunter-gatherer societies have found something more interesting. Brute strength mattered, but coalition building mattered more. The men who rose fastest weren't always the strongest. They were the ones who could form alliances, share resources strategically, and get other men to want to follow them rather than fear them. Status, even in its earliest form, was a social technology as much as a physical one. That distinction matters because it's the exact same skill set that built every empire that came after.
Now fast forward. Agriculture arrives. Surplus arrives. Suddenly, a tribe isn't 40 people anymore. It's 400, then 4,000. And the same ladder that used to top out at most respected hunter in the group now has room to keep going. A strong man doesn't just lead a hunting party anymore, he leads a village. Then he leads several villages. Then he's not just protecting people from rival tribes, he's the reason those tribes don't dare attack in the first place. This is the moment status turns into something new. territory. Because here's the thing about the ancient dominance instinct. It doesn't actually care about land. It cares about being undeniably, visibly, permanently on top. And land is just the biggest, most obvious scoreboard available once tribes get large enough to need one. More territory means more resources. More resources means more people depending on you. More people depending on you means more status than any single man could ever earn one hunt at a time. So the same wiring that once made a man want to be the best hunter in a group of 40 now makes him want to be the reason an entire river valley exists.
And once one man does it successfully, once one chief becomes a king, the ceiling for every ambitious man watching just moved. This is how empires actually start. Not with a master plan, with one man discovering that the status ladder doesn't have a top. And once that discovery is made, it spreads. Neighboring chiefs see what happened. They see a rival who used to be their equal, now commanding tribute, marriages, and loyalty from a dozen villages. The dominance instinct doesn't allow that kind of gap to sit comfortably, so they respond the only way the ancient wiring knows how. They escalate. They build armies of their own, forge alliances of their own, chase the same expanding scoreboard, multiply that pattern across a few thousand years and a few hundred ambitious men, and you don't just get one empire. You get an entire planet's history rewritten by the same evolutionary itch playing out again and again, from the Nile to the Yangtze to the Andes, in civilizations that never even knew the others existed. Here's where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable. In 2003, geneticists studying Y-chromosome data across Asia found something extraordinary. Roughly 16 million men alive today, about 1 in every 200 men on the planet, share a direct paternal lineage traced back to a single individual who lived around 800 years ago in Mongolia. The timing and location line up almost perfectly with one person, Genghis Khan.
Think about what that actually means. One man's genetic legacy is currently walking around inside 16 million living human beings, not because he was the strongest man alive, because he built an empire so vast that the ancient status ladder went into overdrive, and reproductive access followed the hierarchy all the way to the top, exactly the way it did in that 40-person tribe 100,000 years earlier. Same mechanism, different scale. This is the part that should genuinely bother you. Empire building wasn't a departure from evolutionary psychology. It was evolutionary psychology working exactly as designed, just with better tools. Bronze swords instead of sharpened rocks, armies instead of hunting parties, continents instead of grazing land. The behavior barely changed, only the scoreboard got bigger.
So why didn't it stop there? Why does the drive keep escalating, even after a man has more wealth, more land, and more power than he could ever use in one lifetime? This is the status treadmill, and it's genuinely one of the cruelest tricks evolution ever built into the male brain. Status isn't measured in absolute terms. It's measured relative to other men, which means the moment you reach the top, the goalposts don't disappear. They just move to whoever's still climbing beneath you. A king with one kingdom looks at a king with two and feels behind. A conqueror who controls half the known world looks at the other half and feels incomplete. There is no finish line wired into this system, because in the ancestral environment, there never needed to be one. Complacency got you replaced. The instinct that built empires is the same instinct that made Alexander cry at the edge of India, not because he'd failed, but because the map had run out before the drive had. It's worth pointing out how strange this actually is, biologically speaking. Almost every other drive in the human body has a satisfaction mechanism. Hunger turns off when you eat. Thirst turns off when you drink. Exhaustion turns off when you sleep. Status is one of the only major drives that was never given a stop signal, because in the environment it evolved in, an off switch was a liability. The tribe with a leader who felt satisfied enough was historically the tribe that got outcompeted by the one whose leader didn't. So the trait that lost got quietly deleted from the gene pool, generation after generation, until only the restless version remained. And here's the twist that makes this whole thing land differently. This mechanism never got the memo that empires don't really exist anymore. The scoreboard just changed shape. Look at a modern founder working 18-hour days after he's already made more money than 10 generations of his family could spend. Look at a public figure chasing another million followers after the last million stopped feeling like enough. Look at the very human habit of comparing your house, your job, your body, your life to the person one rung above you on a ladder that never actually ends. That's not a personality flaw. That's the same dominant circuitry that built the Mongol Empire, just running in a world with no more continents left to take. The ancient hierarchy didn't disappear when kings stopped wearing crowns. It just went looking for a new scoreboard. Money, followers, titles, square footage, and most people climbing it have no idea. They're wanting an algorithm that's been quietly optimizing for status since before agriculture existed.